Hi there, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Joan Woodward, and I'm honored to lead the Travelers Institute, as you know, the public policy and educational arm of Travelers. So, welcome to this edition of Wednesdays with Woodward. It's going to be a really amazing one, I have to say. This series we created, as you all know, during the pandemic, and we continue it because of you, because you're asking us to continue on talking about topics of importance both in your personal lives and your business lives. So we're really glad you're here. Before we get started, I'd like to share our disclaimer about today's program. I'd also like to thank our webinar partners today. We have a lot: trustedchoice.com, Metro Hartford Alliance, the National Association of Professional Insurance Agents, the Masters of FinTech program at UConn, and the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. And so now on with our program. Today, we are very grateful to have Geralyn Ritter join us. Geralyn is the president and CEO of Crowell Global Advisors, a global public affairs and government relations and public policy company. She has more than 25 years of business, legal, and government experience with a focus on healthcare. So prior to her time in her current position, she's held senior roles, executive roles in pharmaceutical giant Merck and global healthcare company Oregon. Geraldine joins us today to share her story of survival from a sudden, terrible trauma and her path back to hope, life, and joy. And so, Geraldine, welcome. We are so thankful and grateful you can join us today. We know we're going to learn a lot about your personal life, and I know can be difficult for folks to hear, but I have to say, her story of resilience is so compelling. And as you know, in the business world, we need that resilience muscle to carry us through, not in just the business world, but in our personal lives. So, Geraldine, take us back to that day. First of all, welcome. We're thrilled to
Thank you.
have you. Um, Take us back. And I met Geraldine maybe 10 years ago or so, I'm going to say, through the Society of Corporate Governance, and have followed her career with admiration over that decade. And really, she's a powerhouse in the pharmaceutical industry, government affairs, legal industry, and corporate governance. So, Geraldine, take us back to that May 12th, 2015 day. It began as an ordinary day for you, right?
You're exactly right, Joan. And that's even now, it's what strikes me. It's just how normal it was. I live on the East Coast. I'm always between New York and Washington. I was jumping on that Northeast regional train. I'd gone down to DC that morning, had meetings, had an evening event. I was speaking in Philly. It was just so normal. I had taken that train. Literally, I've thought about this probably 100 times. I'd gone down early in the morning and I was on my way home. As I rushed, after this evening event in Philadelphia, I jumped on the train to make that last stop to get off near my home in New Jersey. And I sat down on the train. It's 9 o'clock at night. And I texted my husband, long day, leaving Philly, home soon. And he texted me back, great, see you when you get here. Stevie, my youngest, I have three sons. My youngest was 8 years old at the time, and my husband texts me, Stevie got a legitimate base hit at T-ball today. And I love my Stevie. He did not get a lot of base hits, so this was a big deal. And I tell that story because it was just so ordinary. He said, great, can't wait to get home, see you and the boys. And I put my phone down and you're always impatient when you're the next stop, but I had about half an hour. So I stood up and I reached up to get something to read. I was trying to get something out of my bag off that luggage rack. And I'm standing in the aisle of the train and I lost my balance a little bit. And I was getting sort of annoyed. And I know that route very well. And I realized we were going fast. But I was impatient to get home. I was just kind of annoyed that I was losing my balance as I was trying to get something out of my bag. And all of a sudden, you feel that force of going around a curve. And at this point, I kind of braced myself, holding on to the luggage rack. And I felt like I was leaning forward. And I remember thinking, we're not tipping because trains don't tip. And you sort of doubt yourself in that moment. And then there's this flash of realization that we were tipping over. And I remember hearing screams around me, and I remember my own scream, and that's my last memory. And it's my last memory for several days. I would find out later that the train had derailed going 106 miles an hour around a curve designed for a maximum of 50. In fact, it's the steepest curve in the Northeast Corridor for trains. Meanwhile, back at home, my husband and I had just been texting a few minutes before. He was scrolling on his phone, and he got this news pop up, CNN breaking news alert, Amtrak derailed outside Philadelphia. And I traveled a lot. He was a little worried, but he didn't, what are the chances that was my train? And he didn't know my train number. And he tried to call me and no answer. And he tried to call me again. And a couple minutes later, he got the idea to use the Find My iPhone app. And he searched for my phone, and what came up was sort of a Google's map background with an icon of an iPhone about 20 feet off a railroad track
Oh
at
my
the
gosh.
location where it was
And he could see
reported.
that 20 feet
Yeah.
off. He could
Yeah.
see that
So,
you
I
were
mean,
on
you
the
can see
rail.
what comes up. There was like a map and the railroad track, and you
Oh
can
my
see the
gosh.
phone off on the side. And he just realized that, I wasn't answering. I Something was wrong. And he would end up running out the door, grabbing a close friend from next door. And I had three sons, have three sons. They were 8, 12, and 15 at the time. And right as he's realizing this, my 15-year-old walks in and said, "Hey, Dad, let's go watch the game." And, he said Jonathan was just like white. And he said, my husband, Jonathan, said he had no filter. It was like, "I think Mom's train just crashed. I got to go. You're in charge." And my 15-year-old is Googling what's going on. He ran up and grabbed my 12-year-old. "I think Mom's on a train crash." My husband grabbed a friend and just started driving to Philadelphia. No idea where they were going, but he just knew he needed to get there. And it's about an hour away from our house. Um, and they would end up searching all night long. My husband went to the crash site. This image you're seeing on the screen right now was the first car. That's the car I was riding in. And that previous slide shows the whole train, and most of the cars look like train cars just tipped over. The first car was demolished, as you can tell, and many of the fatalities were in that car. 8 people died that night, and hundreds were injured. Um, as I said, my husband would look all night long. First, he went to the crash site. Then they tried to go family assistance centers, and over the course of the night, finally they'd start going to hospitals. I'm looking for my wife. Her name is Geralyn Ritter. And what really breaks my heart is my sons were at home, 12 and 15 years old, Googling Philadelphia hospitals. We're looking for our mom. Her name is Geralyn. And in the beginning, they would hear either perversely, can you put your parent on the phone? No, that's the whole problem. Or they would hear, we don't have anybody by that name, but a lot of patients coming in, check back later. But as the night wore on, it dawned on my husband. He went to every hospital in Philadelphia. Um, about 4 or 5 in the morning, he thought either, if she was okay, even if she lost her phone, she'd have found a way to reach to call me. Somebody would have called me. She's either gone, and the news reports were starting to break of fatalities. And the text reports of that night between my sons and my husband: "Dad, have you found her? Dad, I've called this hospital. Dad, I need my mom. Dad, people are dead." And like I said, my husband describes falling down to his knees in the hallway of some hospital, you know, early, frankly, the next morning, realizing that either I was so badly hurt that I couldn't reach out to him or I was gone. And he said, it was the strangest prayer, but I just prayed, please God, let her be really badly hurt. And anyway, I know that I was found quickly, but I was a Jane Doe. If you think about it, if a man is thrown out of a train, he probably has a wallet in his pocket. Maybe not, but probably. A woman probably has her identification in a bag, in a purse somewhere. Um, and so nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew where I was. But I've since pieced together that somebody, a rescue worker, found me very quickly, which no doubt saved my life. They brought me to a small local hospital where they realized I was far too hurt to be treated there, but they got me on a ventilator. They were resuscitating me. They got a chest tube in me. They stabilized my pelvis, and they put me on a helicopter to Penn Presbyterian, which at the time was the newest, literally just opened, level 1 trauma center in Philadelphia. The train crashed about 9:30. I was in surgery at the newest level 1 trauma center in Philadelphia by midnight. Um,
Oh, wow. So,
so I
but no one knew
was
this. No one knew this,
so,
of
but
course.
nobody knew where I was, but I was,
But
and
you were
or who
in,
I was. I was still a Jane Doe, but I was so incredibly fortunate
yes.
that, and it still bothers me, Joe, and I don't know who found me. I've never been able, I don't know who saved my life. I've tried through Philadelphia EMS and fire department to thank them. I've been able to thank the surgeons. I've been able to thank the doctors. I chair the patient advisory committee at the hospital where they saved me, but I, um, I still to this day don't know who saved me. Um, but they did. And the next morning, finally, after, they'd gone round and round, a nurse was helping at a hospital. My husband and his friend call around, continually looking and asking again whether they'd identified anyone. And they got word that there was one, literally the last unidentified patient at any Philadelphia hospital from the train. At the hospital where I was taken, there was an unidentified woman in surgery. And they went there and they walked in, and the receptionist at that hospital, they said, we're explained what was going on. And they said, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, you'll need to wait for the chaplain." And my husband's heart just sank again. And the receptionist said, "Don't worry, it's standard procedure," but that didn't make him feel better. And so
No.
he described sitting in this waiting room, being told he needed to wait for the chaplain. It turns out it was standard procedure, and it is the chaplain's job to kind of make sure there's maybe a potential legitimate match, or to counsel the family if there's not, or but finally, my husband and his friend, our friend, were led up into the ICU. I had just come out of my
Ah,
first surgery, and my husband looked at me and didn't recognize me. And he said to his friend, "I don't think it's her." And his friend said, "No, no, no, I think it is." And in my husband's defense, my eyes were taped shut. My forehead, of course, is all bruised and bleeding and covered in track dust. I'm on a ventilator, so the bottom half of my face is covered, and I'm in a giant neck brace, so everything here is covered. I've had massive, open abdominal surgery, and they just left my abdomen open because I knew they were just going to have to keep coming in. They couldn't repair everything all at once, so I'm covered in surgical drapes, and I've got casts on my arms. So he really could only see my eyebrows. His friend says, "No, no, dude, I think it is her. Those are her eyebrows." And sometimes you find humor in strange moments. My husband looked at his friend and he said, "How do you know my wife's eyebrows?" He said, "I don't
well,
know,
and
man.
would your husband necessarily know what your eyebrows look like? We should
Exactly."
know,
I
right?
mean, could
On a
he could
normal day.
exactly. He said, "I don't know, man. We were all at brunch the other day and I noticed her eyebrows." They were having this bizarre conversation as I'm laying there. And finally, they did get the idea to ask if there were personal effects. And the hospital, brought out clothes, but they were unrecognizable. And they brought up this little plastic bag with a big biohazard symbol on it, and there was jewelry inside. And I've joked with my husband. I said, this would be a better story if you saw my wedding ring and said, That's my wife. And he goes, nah, a lot of women have rings like that. But he but there was a bracelet and there was a watch. And he said, I gave her those.
Oh,
You know,
perfect.
I know that bracelet. And there's you know, this heartbreaking text all night long between my husband and my sons. And the last one of the chain is, we found her, she's alive.
Gosh.
So you see up on the screen the list of injuries. I won't belabor it, but it's kind of relevant how serious it was. You know, that the trauma surgeon, when they did identify me, the trauma surgeon came in and said to my husband, do you want to know what we did in surgery? Do you want to understand? He said, nope, her family's all doctors. I got to call them. And so I have three siblings. They're all physicians. Their
Oh, wow.
spouses are physicians. So my husband got one of my brothers on the phone, and the trauma surgeon's talking with him. And she says, let's just start at the top. And she starts going down, and she's about halfway down. And my brother said, I'm sorry, you know, uh, how is she still alive?
Oh,
And the
gosh.
trauma surgeon said to him that it probably wouldn't be long and that the family should fly in. My family's all over the US. We're very scattered, and that they should probably come to say goodbye. And my physician brother flew into town with a dark suit in his bag for my funeral. And so they did not expect me to survive. You see in the corner there, it's what's called an injury severity score. The NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, you know, investigates accidents like this, of course, and there's a scoring system around the risk of fatality for injuries from this kind of disaster. And anything over 15 is considered serious trauma. I was a 57. And so, at least according to the NTSB, I was by far, frankly, the most injured passenger on the train who did not pass. And I'll just, the way it was explained to me as I came to several days later, and, you know, I'm still on a ventilator. It's blink once for yes, twice for no. Do you want to know where you are? And at this point, you know, both my brothers and my sister and my parents, you really think you're dreaming. I'm like, you know,
Everyone
you're so,
came, right?
my gosh, you're so confused. I was like, it takes 2 years to get us all in the same place. And you know, you're immobilized. So but I remember one of my brothers saying to me, there was a crash, and he said, sis, you hit with such force that all my abdominal organs were thrown up into my chest. The rupture, that diaphragm, that thick leathery muscle that, you know, separates your chest from your abdomen was torn. My stomach was up above my heart. My colon was under my armpit. My spleen was destroyed. So
Oh,
obviously
my
there was a
God.
huge loss of blood. My lungs were collapsed. Um, my ribs were crushed. They call it a flail chest. It's not just broken ribs, but they were all pretty much broken in multiple places. So you really can't breathe. Your chest can't generate that negative pressure to breathe. And my pelvis was sort of the worst. You know, the way it was described to me, you know, that my pelvis was basically broken in half. The right side was not connected to the left side. Um, and I had a traumatic penetrating wound that was open and dirty. I basically, the left, you know, that left crest of your hip bone was gone. So they didn't expect me to survive, and they knew it was going to be, if I did, quite a long road back. Um, but I did. You know, I'll fast forward now. We can talk some about this. It would be I was in the hospital in ICU for quite a while. Had about 6 surgeries in rapid succession, some of them sort of marathon. You know, one team comes in, replaces one thing, then the next surgical team comes in. They plated my ribs with metal plates to rebuild a rib cage. They tried to fix my uh, backbone and all of these things. But the incredible thing, you know, that really buoyed us, well, number one was that every day I survived, my odds got better. I was not overwhelmed by infection, which they were very worried about. But they scanned my brain so many times, and they couldn't believe it. Um, my orthopedic surgeon, orthopedic trauma surgeon, very serious guy, would later say to me, he said, Geralyn, I have no medical explanation for how your body absorbed that much force to do what it did to your bones and you don't have a major brain injury. He said, I don't know where the energy went. And I mean, that's an extraordinary statement. I was most definitely concussed. Like you, Joan, I do government affairs and I didn't know who the
Oh,
president was. So
oh no, really? They asked you that
always,
question?
yeah, I mean, do you know who the president is? Do you know what year it is? No, no. But, they did every scan imaginable. My brain wasn't bleeding and so that was extraordinary. I
That
broke three
was.
bones in my neck. I broke three bones in my lower back. I broke C7, but in just such a way that it didn't impinge on my spinal cord. They weren't sure I was going to walk again, but I wasn't paralyzed. And so I lived. At least my brain was intact and I wasn't paralyzed. And we just said, and I was so aware that 8 people had died. And so we were just grateful. In the beginning, I mean, it was overwhelming and confusing and painful, but we were so grateful. And that picture you showed, it's around gratitude. That really carried us in the beginning. And we are a family that has faith, and that was important to us. And, even in the darkest times, there's something you can be grateful for. And so it was funny when I finally got out of the hospital and they were transferring me to an inpatient rehab center. You know, I'm strapped to a gurney being transported by ambulance, but that was the after picture. That was the better one. And then after, another several weeks, I got to go home, which was, a beautiful feeling, but in many ways, the real start of the recovery journey. I thought I was going to go back to work in a few weeks. Bones heal in 6 weeks, right? You break your arm, you wear a cast. And I was so wildly unrealistic and so unprepared for the pain and what a long journey it would be. So to skip to the end, I would spend almost 2.5 years on
Mm.
total disability, away from my job completely, and walking again, having lots and lots. Today, I've had probably about 25 surgeries, and they rebuilt me. They rebuilt me.
I mean, it's such a story of, it's just such a story. It's just unbelievable. And I'm sure as you're going through it, you just thought, this is unbelievable. This has happened to our family.
Oh my gosh.
Uh,
Yes.
and the unknown. So for me, like I like to control everything in my life.
Oh,
I'm very organized, and if one thing's out of place, it bothers me. So
yeah.
there were so many unknowns. How did you deal with that? I mean, you're a top executive at Merck, right? You're sitting at the top of the world of a huge global pharmaceutical company, and then this happens and you can't control anything. And so not knowing if you're ever going to get your life back, how do you,
Yeah.
so I want to apply this now to everyone on our call here. We've had 4,000 people register for this. And I know this is captivating for a lot of people because I haven't heard a story like this literally in my entire life. And so I'm so first of all grateful and thankful for you to come on and share this with us and to have a sense of humor now. I don't know it's been almost 10 years, but looking back, how did you deal with that uncertainty? And maybe that helps people on the phone
Yeah.
deal with uncertainty that in their lives right now.
It was one of the toughest parts of the journey. You put your finger right on it. I, I'm sure everybody on this call, we're doers. We like to think we're achievers. And if you set a goal and you put enough effort into it, you're going to achieve it, right? And we like to have a plan. And to recognize that, that there was only so much that the doctors could tell me because I had
No,
such a constellation of injuries. One doctor might tell me, when my next surgery was, or when this would heal, but nobody had the full picture.
sure.
And that was difficult, the complete loss of independence. I mean, I had a global role at Merck. I've traveled to so many really random small places on much more unsafe modes of transportation.
Yes.
And so the complete to not even be able to get out of bed by myself and to have no idea really how long the journey would be was one of the toughest parts. And we can talk about this more later. The staying grateful staying optimistic that you were going to get through this. But I had to learn the hardest part of me was to temper that with the realism of what I didn't want to believe, which is how long it was going to take and the lack of certainty about the outcome. I could try as hard as I could at physical therapy. I could take my medicines regularly, but ultimately, I had to learn to have trust, have faith, and to let go of that need for certainty and try to focus on what I could do. I couldn't plan the future. I couldn't fix it. But ultimately, I came to realize there were things I could do. I could try to understand what was happening to me. I became a student of trauma. I read medical textbooks on pain. I read patient memoirs. I wanted to understand why I was yelling at my kids, why I, was having some of the mental health challenges that I was, because I thought PTSD didn't apply to me. Like, no,
Yeah.
no, I'm not a combat veteran.
Right.
Nobody
You weren't in,
tried to hurt me, not a victim of domestic violence.
yeah.
This was an accident. I'm a rational person and accidents happen, right? So and that's not how it works. Our brains are wired a certain way. We have biochemical responses that affect our mood, and overwhelming chronic pain has a physiological impact. So part of dealing with the uncertainty was to at least learn as much as I could. I found a lot of support in reaching in social connections, in friends, in my family, my kids. My kids ultimately, I think, saved me. You know, when the depression set in, it was ultimately what got me out of bed. And
But let's talk about that because
yeah,
so many of us, again, like to be in control. First of all, it is no surprise to me that you had read textbooks and you're reading trauma. And in 2025, I just want to tell my viewers we are going to have a huge focus on our well-being and PTSD and sleep and mental health. And we have a huge, we're going to roll it out in 2025, focusing on this because so many people post-pandemic are dealing with this. And
yeah,
for, as you say, people like us, we're organized, we're high achievers, we're optimists. I'm going to
right,
say everyone on this call today is an optimist. And my CEO, Alan Schnitzler, talks about successful people are optimists. And I
yes,
believe that.
yep,
Pessimistic people have a very hard time achieving high success rates because they're pessimistic about the future. So,
right,
as an optimist, let's talk a little bit about pain management because we
yeah,
know pain management, we see this in our workers' comp business too. There was a picture up there with all the pill bottles that you were taking. So
yeah,
were you on, I'm assuming you're on opioids, and how did you deal with the pain and the opioid?
yeah,
Um, just walk us through that because so many of our
sure,
workers' comp clients they have pain management through opioid management. How did that
yep.
work for you?
It was a whole nother challenging part of this journey. And when I was finally released from all the hospitals, and so you're not on IV anymore, and you're needing to fill your prescription yourself, I did have a professional pain management doctor to advise me, which was very helpful. But I was on massive doses. In fact, at the time, the FDA recommended, they call it morphine milligram equivalents. So you could take Oxycontin, oxycodone, fentanyl, and say, okay, put that all together, was 90 milligrams. I was on 570. So I was on 150 micrograms of fentanyl and Oxycontin and oxycodone. And at one point, I asked my orthopedic surgeons a couple months after the accident, and I said, even with all of this, when my rib cage was, it hurt to breathe. I said, it hurts to breathe. And you tell me to breathe deeply to keep my lungs clear. I try to breathe as shallowly as I can every waking moment. And he said, Geralyn, people tell me that one or two cracked ribs hurts for months. He said, your rib cage was annihilated. He said, and he was very straightforward with me. He said it was probably going to be, 8 months at least. And that wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was actually really helpful that it wasn't that I wasn't being tough enough or I was being a wimp. I needed massive doses literally to feel able to breathe. But it was a real challenge. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I had studied adherence and patient compliance. And boy, was it hard being on the other side. When I was released home, I had 16 different prescriptions, many of them controlled substances. And for very good reasons, of course. Controlled means controlled, right? You can only get a 30-day prescription and you can't refill it early. And you got to show up in person at the pharmacy, and it's all on prior authorization. And then they usually need to special order it because they're not going to keep some of this stuff in stock. But the problem is, I can't drive, I can't stand. If you won't refill it until day 29, but then the insurance company wants 48 hours, and then the pharmacy wants to special order it, I'm in withdrawal and I can't breathe. And my husband rolls me in the wheelchair to the pharmacist, and my joke is that all my injuries were, mostly on my torso. So I, I don't
Face
look,
up, you look good.
I don't look like a train wreck.
Right.
When you're
No
telling the
pun intended.
pharmacist, I need my fentanyl and I need it now, and
Now,
he's looking at you like, and
I just can't believe you're I just can't believe how joyful you are. Like, I know you're grateful, but I just don't know how many people could come through this and just laugh about these things. But
it
it's
was
just,
almost so crazy, Joan. You just had to I just thought, he would say, oh, maybe you try the pharmacy across the street. I'm like, great. Now I'm really flagged for drug seeking behavior because I'm driving all over town looking for my fentanyl. And the insurance company wants to make sure you're not selling it. So I needed to go do urine tests every month to prove I was taking the drugs. And I'm thinking, trust me, I am taking them. But also my bladder was destroyed. So I can't really do that very easily. So I would sit there trying to give a urine sample to prove I was taking my drugs. And it would take me hours, and they would be knocking on the door. I'm like, I can't, my bladder doesn't work. And so
I
I
can't
remember
believe
once
this.
sitting, this is a crazy story. I shouldn't even tell it, but I'm sitting there, and I thought, okay, I'll try that trick where you turn on the water
Water. I've
and
done
so I
that.
can just get out of this place. But it was one of those automatic things. So
You
I'm
got to
on
keep
my
reaching over.
so I'm on my walker, with my pants around my ankles. I crutch over, I wave at the sink, and then I try to walk her over to the toilet. Then the water goes off. At one point, I took this roll of toilet paper. I was trying to throw it at the sensor. So, and you just have to say, you know what? This would be like a really bad comedy routine. So anyway,
Oh God, I'm
the,
crying.
the drugs were a journey, and I went through after about 6 months, I was ready to start weaning. And I did it under medical supervision, and I was so impatient. It's so slow, but it's the way you have to do it.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
was one drug at a
Okay.
time, 25% down for the month,
Reduced.
then 25%. Then after, 4 months, you start the next drug. And, the problem is you lower your pain, you lower the opioids, so the pain is worse, and you got the withdrawal. And I am so fortunate that I must not have the genetic makeup or the brain chemistry to have ever become addicted, in the
I was
sense
going to
of
ask you about that. Right.
yeah, the medical definition of that craving. I did not have that. Um, but absolutely, you're physically dependent. I mean, 100% of people that take high doses of fentanyl for 7 months or you're going to be, your body is accustomed. And so the nausea, the chills, the shakes, I really was one of my lowest points. I was almost at the end of my rope because it felt like just insult on injury, all the physical pain plus the stigma, plus I'm now going through withdrawal on top of it. It's when I started looking to other therapies like meditation and breathing and yoga. And I was always a huge skeptic. I was a snob on those things. Yoga was for people that didn't want to sweat when they exercised, and when I had my sons, I was so ignorant about this stuff. When I had my sons, I had refused to go to those classes because I told my husband I had been breathing for 30 years and I was quite sure I knew how to do it.
Lamaze, right? Lamaze
Yeah,
classes.
yeah. I was like, nope, nope, I don't have time. I'm busy. I'm not doing breathing classes. I know how to breathe. But when I was really going through all of that, I was desperate. And I think sometimes when you're at your lowest, being open to things that you might have dismissed before as tools to help you're more open to it, and you should be. And I got an instructor that would come to my house and help me, and it helped.
It
It gave
helps.
me back a little bit of a sense of control and agency over my body. There was one thing I could do that didn't require a prescription and, this incredible difficulty. And, I still today, I try to lean on those sort of techniques, in conjunction with other types of medicine, but it did help.
I'm going to point out here to again, this wasn't a setup, but we're going to have a whole session on mindfulness and
Oh,
yoga. And
good.
if for those skeptics out there, like I was for many, many years about mindfulness and breathing and yoga
Yep.
and ways to kind of, help yourself
Yep.
in alternative methods versus just going to the gym on a treadmill or running a
Yep.
half marathon, which I probably will never do in my life. But anyway, so I want to get back to resilience. And
Yeah.
a lot of this was very alienating for you. So you're experiencing all of these emotions, physical
Yep.
pain, just, as you say, it was PTSD. You don't want to admit that it was. You weren't in a
No, it
combat
was.
zone, but
It was.
so those alienating feelings for you. And I know you had your family and you had your faith, and I want to talk about that as well. But I want to talk about what are the keys to resilience for you and how you kind of came up with this grasp kind of notion, or just talk
Yeah.
to us a minute about how the rest of us on this call can learn to be more resilient. I think Sheryl Sandberg is the one who said resilience is like a muscle. You have to exercise it,
Absolutely.
otherwise it goes away, right?
That's exactly right. And sometimes we think of resilience as the same thing as strength, and it's really not. You can think of a giant oak tree and it's strong, but if it blows over, it's not getting back up. And resilience is getting back up. And I was thinking about this topic, and maybe it's kind of corny, but it sort of made the mnemonic grasp, and grasp means to hold on tightly. And I thought, maybe that's not wrong. And I've talked about how gratitude and optimism was really important. I always thought I was going to get better. I didn't, I gradually came to accept I'd never be as strong as I was. I'm always going to be sort of medically vulnerable and a complicated patient, but I never let my self think I was not going to get better. And we did have a lot to be grateful for. One of the hardest parts for me, and this balance between optimism, but also, you can't go through life with rose-colored glasses. And I kind of set myself up for failure. I was so optimistic. I was calling my boss a couple months after the accident, telling him I'd be back in 6 weeks. And then I would need another surgery. And then I would call him and say, oh, it's probably going to be another month. And then I'd need another surgery. And I'd tell him, oh, it's probably going to be another 2 months. And then I'm weaning off the painkillers. And it was almost a full 9, 10 months after the accident. And I found out I was going to need a massive reconstructive surgery. I was going to spend a whole nother summer, full year after the accident, back on the walker, you know, uh, uh, 10 days in the hospital, and reconstructing my left side. And I finally called my boss and I said, you know what? I have no idea when I'm coming back. And he said, yeah, I know.
You knew
And
that.
everybody knew but me. My mother would tell me that she would hear me on the phone telling my boss it was going to be another month. And she said she would leave the room and cry because she knew it wasn't true, but nobody wanted to burst my bubble. But I set myself up for failure, by putting these artificial deadlines and nobody wanting to tell me that I was crazy. They didn't want me to not to be optimistic. But then I think it made the depression worse because I felt like I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe I'm wallowing. Maybe I'm allowing and uh, you know, it's hard to be grateful for pain forever. And I needed, like when the doctor told me, it's probably going to be 8 months till you can breathe. And I needed to hear that. I've talked a little bit about action orientation, figuring out things you can do. I had to reorient. There was so much I couldn't. But on the other hand, I've worked all my life. I've always worked after short maternity leaves. And the clock you see there on the screen is kind of my symbol. It was months after the accident. I'm in my downstairs hospital bed. I didn't see my master bedroom for 2 years. So I'm downstairs, and all three boys walk in from school at 3 in the afternoon, and it hit me. I was like, I've never been home at 3 in the afternoon when they come home from school. I hear about their day 4 hours later at dinner. And I thought, get yourself out of this bed. And, it was like, I have this afternoon time with three boys who have been terribly worried about me. And there's a really wonderful book that I read that talks about timefulness, and it talks about being friends with time. And time was always, anyway, I started to think about time differently. And you start to say, I've got this time. What are you going to do with it? And this silly picture there, it's sort of the reframing. My boys and I making a really ugly homemade cake, on a weekday afternoon. And yet it's, finding those things you can do. There's a quote there from an author I like. She's a professor at Duke, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer when she had a 2-year-old toddler, and she wasn't expected to live. And she found herself, she did beat the odds. And she said she looked in the mirror one day and she had wrinkles. And she said, "Oh my God, thank God for wrinkles. I was never supposed to get wrinkles." And I thought that's a great example of reframing. You hear about survivor's guilt or post-traumatic stress, but there is a flip side, survivor's pride and the growth that comes from going through something like this. So that was the G, the R, the A, the S is social connections. There's a ton of medical literature out there on all sorts of folks and situations, and those with networks of friends and family and that network of social support live longer, report less pain. It really is important. It's not a nice to have. And I was, think, one of those people that focused on my family and focused on my job, and friends were nice, but I wasn't always the first one at the birthday party. But I really needed my friends. I needed my friends to make me laugh. And that was being intentional and deliberate about your broader network. Um, we all need that. And my last thing was purpose and perspective. An event like this makes you really think about how you're spending your time. When I finally did go back to work 2.5 years later, it was much more intentional. I was much more thoughtful about why I was doing it. Um, and I think that's part of resilience too, kind of knowing your why, as they say. Something like this really makes you think about that.
I love all that, and I'm guilty of I probably don't have as many close friends in my life because I focus so much on my family. I have 4 kids, for those of you who don't know, and my career. And both of
Yep.
those things are so important to me. And when it crowds out the rest of your me time, your personal time to develop
Yes.
and nurture, I mean,
Yep.
relationships take time. So I think, my strange piece of advice is, make more friends and make friends that count in your life that are
Absolutely.
precious to you,
Yep.
and you're right about intentionality, especially in our busy lives, spending that
Yep.
time on intentional things that you're going to get you know feedback and feel hopeful. I want to get to some audience questions because there's so many coming in. First of all, everyone's saying it's a miracle. Thank you so much for sharing your story. They're learning so much about resilience. But I want to talk about caregivers because
Yeah.
you've advised that these people take care of you. Is there anything you would advise people who may be taking care of elderly folks or maybe a disabled child? What advice do you have to caregivers? Because that can be, and how did your husband, how did he cope with it? Did he pull in other resources? I mean, give us a advice on being a caregiver to someone
Sure.
who's
It's
had this.
such an important topic. I'm really glad you mentioned it. And the experience was extremely difficult on my husband and I. And I will share, and I put this in my book. It nearly broke our marriage. And we are still married after 27 years. But there was quite a while in there that I doubted we would make it. And the stress was just overwhelming. And I thought I was a very grateful patient. He doesn't remember it that way, and it's natural. I know now from my research That was totally to be expected, and I wish we had more counseling about this up front. And I've done some research. Caregivers of folks that are in the ICU have almost the same rates of PTSD, of depression, and also later on of physical consequences, obesity, heart issues. So it's a really serious thing. And, it sounds trite, but like they say on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on
First,
first. It's really important. And, um, whatever that means for you. And maybe it means the me time, maybe it means exercise, maybe it means making sure you as a caregiver have the social support that you need. But one thing I would say is don't expect your loved one that you're taking care of to understand. I thought I did, and we had a strong relationship, and I was trying. I couldn't. And Jonathan, my husband, couldn't understand where I was, and he wanted to.
you wanted to.
But, when your world as a patient has fallen apart, I was trying to get through the day. And I couldn't understand. We said terrible things to each other. I mean, I said to my husband, "Why are you so tired?" And he's thinking, "Because I'm taking care of you." And then he said to me, like, "Well, what are you doing? What, your job, your whole job's to sit around here and get better?" I'm thinking, yeah. Everybody's come in the house asking about me, not about him.
Him.
And his reaction was one of anger. He had a lot of anger about the accident, about the safety measures that weren't in place, about the federal cap on damages. And I was just sad. And so he needed, he wanted to shake his fist, and that was his, and that was the last thing I could hear. So we really struggled to be in the same place, even though he was doing a tremendous amount to help me. We were trying, and it was still hard. So I think it goes back to making sure you're taking care of yourself, because the person you're taking care of, I think, cannot understand how hard it is for you. Um, but there's no weakness, there's no shame in acknowledging that you need that support too.
Right.
But you're going to have to be the one that initiates what that looks like, whether it's support, whether it's therapy, whether it's friends, whether it's time off. But just muscling through is not a recipe for success.
Really, really, really good advice. And I know I love how you say no shame, no, no blame, placing
No,
blame on anyone about what might have happened. Did you have any anger towards, like, for example, the engineer of the train? Was the engineer found at fault? Like, give us fast forward to like what happened. NHTSA did a investigation, I'm sure, and what was the
yeah,
outcome of all that?
it's really interesting.
Again, not
But
that that part matters, but I think for closure,
no,
people kind of want to know what
yeah.
happened.
Well, and some people have different reactions. For some people, it matters a lot. And I know some of the families of the deceased, for very understandable reasons, it mattered a lot. Um, for me, it didn't. By all accounts, he had been a model employee, had a passion for trains since he was a since he was a boy. He was not on his phone. He was not on drugs. He was, the official result of the investigation was that he lost situational awareness, kind of forgot where he was, and
Mm.
distracted driving, I guess we would call it,
Oh, wow.
and that's not very satisfying, but I'm not sure what would be. Would it be satisfying if he'd made a big, And so for me, I thought, what do I get out of, he's not going to drive a train again, obviously. What do I get out of him going to jail? And
Yep.
so it was not, he ultimately, after a lot of legal back and forth, charges were filed. He was not convicted. Um, that's kind of a separate story. But, I was asked if I wanted to testify, and I said, no. I mean, you can subpoena me, but
Yeah.
it's not, no, I
It's
don't.
not, you don't need the negativity. I mean,
No,
you're on a
no.
positive trajectory. I
Well, it wasn't personal to him,
yeah.
and more, I was focused more. There are technologies called positive train control. Like, we have self-driving cars. The
Yes.
technology has existed for decades, and it has been recommended by federal regulators for decades. Now it's required after this accident that automatically tracks and slows a speeding train. If a train is going into a curb at twice, more than twice, it automatically brakes it. And they had installed it on every curve in the Northeast Corridor except that one.
Except that one.
Except that one.
And but that
Because
was the most dangerous one you said.
it was so, I think the rationale, I could be wrong. In fact, it was installed southbound, but not northbound, was that it was that trains surely wouldn't go that fast pulling out of Philadelphia. I don't know,
Wow.
so that was more the frustration, and that's where I focused my advocacy, and it was, we got to get this, and it is now more seriously mandated.
Good.
Um, but not the
And you've been
personal.
back on a train since?
I irony of ironies, I still live in New Jersey. My youngest son is in high school now, but my job is in Washington, and I take the train almost every week, back and forth. And when I pass that curve, I feel it in my bones. It's not a flashback. I know exactly where I am, but I bow my head and I try to remember those not as fortunate. Um, and but it was a sort of a determination that I'm going to be in charge of this. And if I want to continue working on the East Coast, I'm going to retire when I'm ready to retire. And I had my husband ride with me the first time because I didn't know how I would react. And when the conductor came and took my ticket, I handed it to him. I said, my last train ride was 188. This was just about 6 months. And he looked at me like I was going to jump at him. And I said, just tell the driver to go slow. But
Oh,
and
I'll
he
bet
kind of
he
like,
did.
okay, lady. But yeah, I do. I don't love it, but I am not scared. In fact, I joke with my colleagues. I'm like, I'm the safest person to travel with because what are the chances?
Oh gosh, I want to get to a couple of audience questions,
Yeah,
and I know we just have so many of them, and I apologize ahead of time. We can't get to all of them, but
no.
a couple of people want to talk about the book Bone to
Okay.
Bone.
Oh
So this is a
yeah.
two-part question, and then I want you to talk about you talk about finding your sparkles or reframing, changing your perspective. Talk
Yeah.
about your sparkles. Talk about the book. Did it help you get through the experience? Is it? I'm sure it's helped others build resiliency, and I just again, I go back to you're laughing about this, and it's just so incredible to think where you've come from.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the comments are saying, this makes my pain or this makes my daily struggle with X, Y, and Z, whatever they're dealing with. Like, this is just, I can handle this little thing because look what Geraldine has done. Okay, the book
I
and sparkles.
sure, sure. It's funny. I had all this time and I was just so many extraordinary things that my kids would say that I didn't want to forget or something. And I was just started taking notes. And I had a really very difficult surgery about a year after the accident. It was that big reconstruction. I coded, they had to bring me back. And I was telling I had gone in just to visit in my wheelchair. I wasn't at work, obviously, but I'd gone back into Merck just to say hi to colleagues. And I was sitting with our CEO, Ken Frazier, for those of you that know Merck, just an extraordinary leader. And I was sitting in his office chatting with him, and he said, Geraldine, you have to write a book. And I said, oh, Ken, like, I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so strong. I said, by the grace of God. And he said, no, 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 you're thinking about this wrong. He said, there's hope, there's things that helped you. And he quoted scripture to me. He said, the Bible says, don't hide your light under a bushel. He said, you have a story and you need to tell it. And it kind of flipped a switch for me. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that. And if nobody needs it, great, right? Nobody needs it. That's good. I said, but if somebody takes some hope, or if a practitioner says, oh, gee, maybe I should counsel my patients a little bit different, if there's some way that it helps other survivors, then the way I think about it is at least one good thing came out of the accident. And I've had this experience. I can't change it. But then the question is, what do you do about it? And so I had the opportunity just last week to speak at the American College of Surgeons. There was a big convention, and I was talking to them more from a medical perspective about the trauma, the patient perspective. And a woman stood up in the audience and she said, you may not remember me, but I was the nurse at your bedside when your husband identified you. Blew me away. I almost
Oh
cried in
my
front
God.
of 2,500 people. And so to me, this is It's the one thing I can do. And so I donate all the proceeds from the book to the American Trauma Society and to Trauma Medicine, or the Trauma Survivors Network, which is like a peer counseling network for survivors. I, in principle, don't want to make a dime off of this, but it was a feeling, a little bit of pay it forward, and it was the one thing I could do. And so, I talk about the experience and I talk about the mental health aspects because, in my last job, I reported to the CEO. I thought, if I can't be open about having gone on this journey, then who can be? Like we need to destigmatize some of these things. So that's why I wrote it. And
It's a
it's
wonderful book.
been
It's a wonderful book.
thank you. It's raw. I have a very small publisher, and my husband, I'm so grateful he agreed. I said, if I whitewash all the ugly parts, then I'm doing a disservice to
Yeah.
folks, And so, I wrote it not too long after. It took a while to get it out, but it's what happened.
It's amazing. I want to ask you one more questions coming in from our audience here. So, again, before you were a very big executive, worked for the CEO of Merck. I mean, reporting right to a CEO of this global pharmaceutical. Tell us how your approach to leadership has changed because of
Yeah.
what you've been through, resilience, and everyone on our call is a leader or a manager of people. So,
Yeah.
give us some advice about what we could take away from your book and your experience to be better leaders for our folks.
Yeah. The word that comes to mind, and in some circles is a little bit of a buzzword right now, but it really resonates with me, is authenticity. And, when I finally went back to work, I did so very intentionally. My friend said to me, "Why on earth are you going back to the corporate world after what you've been through?" And I thought about the answer to that question. I thought, I work in healthcare. What we do. I believe in what we do and having an impact. And I want to spend my time that way. And, but part of that is also being without I don't want to be train wreck girl, right? I don't want the accident to define me, but it
Yes.
is very much part of who I am. And I try to be very open about that. I joked with my new boss at a job. I said, I'm not interviewing. I really do have that many doctor's appointments. And so, there's some, and so I think there is an authenticity and an empathy in the way that I work with my teams that might not have been as strong before. And I feel like people sense that and react to that. And it creates a little bit of a safe space for us to work together.
I can't think of a better way to end our session, and I can't believe this time has flown by. I try to keep these to an hour, Geraldine, but I am so grateful for reconnecting with you in the last month or so. We saw each other at a big conference in New York, and again, I went to clean out my office the other day just because I need to do it every so many months. And I found the email you sent me literally, I think it was more than 10 years ago because it
No
was before
way.
the accident. I found that email. I was going to show it today, but and it was just you were so grateful then that I came and spoke to your group, and it was just so authentically written in your own voice. So you were authentic and genuine and with empathy towards me many, many years ago. And this is not
Thank
a new
you.
trait for you, I'm sure, but I love how
Thank
you
you.
made this into kind of your leadership ethos now, and it does help others to hear that because I'm kind of a button down person too, and I think
Yeah.
the empathy part of being a leader is and the authenticity part
Yeah.
is incredible. So I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of my heart. And again, everyone on our call putting into the chat and the Q&A saying thank you for sharing your story of resilience. And thank you for the book and your
Thank
really
you.
wise words and wisdom. And we wish you nothing but the best with your continued recovery and your amazing sons and your amazing husband. And kudos to your support network, which I'm sure was very difficult to go through. But
Yeah.
you're here today. You're working. You're sharing. You're just a role model for all of us.
Well, I am so honored. I mean, Joan, I have admired your work for so long, and I am really honored to speak with this group. It's very special to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. Really take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, folks, I want to ask you a few questions. So take the survey in our link right now. It's in the chat. Please let us know what you thought about today's program and also what you like to see in the future. If you're a podcast person, please add our new podcast, the Travelers Institute Risk and Resilience podcast, on Spotify or Apple, wherever you get your podcast. We have some great webinars coming up, folks. So on December 4th, we're going to talk with LinkedIn's labor economists. So the labor force, labor shortages, wage gains with Corey Kentanga for a rundown on what's going on in the labor market. December 11th, I'm going to be joined by our Personal Lines President and CEO, Michael Klein. He's going to talk with Jad Daly, President and CEO of the American Forests, and talk about wildfire risk around the country. Wildfires blowing up. I'm here in Hartford today. This is my Hartford office for those of you who wanted to know where I was today. And blowing up in Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts, as well as, of course, California and Colorado is always a risk. And then on January 15th, Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's, is going to join us for an economic outlook for 2025 and what the presidency and the new Congress means for your business. So please tune in on January 15th to get the scoop on that. Again, Geralyn, thank you. God bless you. And everyone out there, be well, my friends. We'll see you in a few weeks.